Look at that retention. Ooh. Today we're talking the Chemex and why I don't use it, but maybe you should. The first thing I want to say is that I respect the heck out of the Chemex, and honestly, without the Chemex, this channel wouldn't exist. It was my first brewer and the one that I got everything started on, but it is one of the most legendary brewers of all time. That's not my grievance with it. It's just how it brews coffee. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think the Chemex is bad. I just don't prefer it. In fact, I haven't used it for almost 2 years for two good reasons. And in this video, I want to talk about why that is, and maybe you'll resonate with me, or maybe you just won't agree. Regardless, let me know by hitting down in the comments below if you prefer the Chemex. Is that your favorite brew method? And if it isn't, which do you prefer? But let's talk, because this is a very, very controversial topic. I love the legacy of the Chemex. I just don't love brewing coffee with it. And here's why. So the first issue I have with this brewer is simply its filter. Now you might be expecting this because it is a quite unique design, and honestly I don't think there's another brewer kind of like this. Now this is actually what makes the Chemex the Chemex. It's not necessarily the design of the brewer itself. I mean, yes, this is the Chemex, but without this filter, it's just another glass piece of art. This is really what separates this from other brewers. It is a very large filter compared to other filters. Like that's a lot of paper, which is kind of my first point, that it's kind of wasteful. I feel like there's way too much paper for what you're using it for. Why they use so much paper in the Chemex is simply so that you can have a very clear cup of coffee. You see, what happens is this is such a thick piece of paper, there's great clarity in your cup. And that's what some people love about the Chemex. There is unmatched clarity from this brewer. But there's a trade-off in that. When you give clarity, you're taking away something else, and often it's body. Now, normally I would be down for that. The clearer the cup, the better. But in the case of the Chemex, it's almost too much. Almost. Now, that's just a personal preference, and taste is subjective, so you might not agree. So don't hate on me for that thought, because that's totally cool if you don't think the same way. I totally respect that. But that's just my thoughts on the design of the filter and why I don't love it. I just don't love how it takes away some of the nuances I love in coffee. I'll never put a geisha or something I spent extra money on in a Chemex, because I feel it actually takes away some of those nuances I'm paying for. The second issue I have with the Chemex is the design for batch brews. Now, the Chemex is designed for bigger cups. This isn't a brewer you would often use for doses less than 20 grams of coffee. So if you're brewing for multiple people, you're brewing a batch brew. Now, here's the issue I have with it. Obviously, it's beautiful. Obviously, it's big, and it's so great to pour in front of your friends and show off, hey, look at this awesome specialty coffee Chemex that I'm brewing with. The problem is, both the design of the filter and the shape of the filter work against it being good at making batch brews. Let me explain. This is a conical filter, and so it's shaped like a cone. And how it works is, obviously you put your coffee in this filter, and the compounds in the coffee are broken down the more water that is put into the coffee bed. And over time, those compounds are broken down more and more and more. Now, the more coffee you put into a filter, the more compounds can be broken down. Makes sense. But in a conical filter, what happens is the surface area and the contact time is not even between all the grounds in this filter. You see, at the top, you might have a diameter of, let's say, 8 centimeters, but on the very bottom, at this bottom of the cone, you have a diameter of 1 centimeter. So the coffee that's on the bottom here will have a lot more contact time than the coffee that's on top. Now, maybe you've had this issue with a Chemex. I often find myself choking a filter. The water straight up stops drawing down, or slows down so much so that you're sitting there looking at your watch like, have I done something wrong here? Did gravity cease to exist? And so this is something that I find so often with the Chemex. It really can be frustrating for people who are getting into brewing coffee at home. As somebody who educates people and helps people brew coffee at home, I might say aim for a brew time so you can find consistency in your cup. But if you're brewing on a Chemex, sometimes you can find yourself brewing 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-minute cups. I have text message threads that went on for months with friends trying to figure out what they were doing wrong with the Chemex. They weren't doing anything wrong. They were just brewing with a bad grinder and too much coffee, and it would choke every single time. Now, maybe you haven't had that experience, and if you haven't, then that's so great. But maybe you have had that experience, and I would love to know in the comments down below, have you ever choked a Chemex brewer? Has it ever stalled in the middle of brewing coffee? For those two reasons alone, I find it very, very difficult to recommend to people for one of the first brewers to buy. So let's talk about that. So here's the deal. I am not saying to never use the Chemex. I am speaking to the one who is trying to get into specialty coffee at home, trying to get into brewing coffee at home. You've been told to get a Chemex, or you own a Chemex, or you've owned a Chemex for years, and you have the same frustrations I have. The stalling, the choking in your brews, and you're wondering what is going wrong. This is where I think there are better options on the market for multiple reasons. That one reason alone is huge. It can be so frustrating to brew Chemex at home, and I know I'm going to be ripped up in the chat down below of, you should grind coarser, you should do this, you should do that. But hey, at the end of the day, if people are trying to get into coffee at home, I have had those same issues where I've ground all the way to its max coarse setting and it's still stalling. And so I need to understand that and address that, because there are so many different situations for people brewing coffee at home. So here's the thing I would recommend. If you're in this situation, or maybe you just want to buy your first brewer and you've had your eye on the Chemex because it's so beautiful, it looks so great, but you want to make sure you get the right purchase, I would recommend purchasing a Kalita Wave. And this is why. The Kalita Wave can brew similar batch sizes as the Chemex, and the Kalita Wave is a flat bottom brewer. And this is similar to batch brewers you'd find in a cafe. My Ratio 6 batch brewer I have here at home is a flat bottom brewer, and that can brew over a liter of coffee. The flat bottom brewer will be a little bit more forgiving on your grind size. So if you have a grinder that's maybe not the greatest, or maybe you're still waiting to purchase a burr grinder and you're using like a blade grinder, which if you are, definitely upgrade to a burr grinder sooner than later. It will change your life. But this is a great option for you because it's a little bit more forgiving. The Chemex will not be. The Chemex will be so tough on you. As somebody who's been brewing coffee at home for years, I still have issues with the Chemex all the time, depending on my grind size, depending on the water I'm using. Now, my other suggestion is if you want to get into home brewing and you want to buy your first pour over brewer, I would say either get the V60 or the AeroPress. The AeroPress is incredibly forgiving, and it will let you grind at whatever grind size. It will allow you to have an immersion style brew. Now, James Hoffman just released a video a couple days ago about immersion versus percolation, and I would love you to check that out. And I'm going to try and link that, or I'll link it down in the description below, because it really addresses the idea that immersion is more forgiving in our grind size. This was my first brewer, and I'm forever grateful for the Chemex and what it has done. But what I'm finding is the more and more I brew coffee at home, the less and less I'm using the Chemex. And there's good reasons for that. So what about you? Do you agree with what I said? Or do you love the Chemex? At the end of the day, this is subjective and it's only my personal opinion, so I totally respect if you love the Chemex. I'd love to know in the comments down below. This is just my personal preference. I don't often use this brewer, but it's the brewer that got me started in all of this, so I respect it. If you're looking for a new brewer, you want to start brewing coffee at home, the Chemex may be a good option, but I would highly recommend something like the Kalita Wave. You've got a brewer that's a little bit more forgiving, being a flat bottom brewer, and it's a little bit more portable. I think it's just overall a better option, and it's cheaper. And get this, you can find filters for it. Now, if you found this video at all helpful or interesting, let me know by hitting that like button down below. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know in that comment box down below as well. That's where I'll be hanging out. In the meantime, continue to brew great coffee and continue to brew at home. Peace. We'll see you next time.